For over 30 years, Jessi Colter was the silent protector of the outlaw king, Waylon Jennings. But while the world saw a fearless rebel, Jessi was hiding a dark truth, a secret about a final conversation and a curse that haunted Waylon until the day he died. What did she find in that unmarked box in Tucson, and why did she wait until now to speak? To understand the magnitude of this secret, you have to look past the leather vests, the driving Telecaster guitars, and the booming baritone voice that defined a generation. When you think of Waylon Jennings, you think of the ultimate American outlaw. You think of a man who looked the Nashville music establishment dead in the eye and told them to go to hell. You think of platinum records, arenas packed with screaming fans, and a larger-than-life persona that seemed completely invulnerable to the pressures of the world. But that invulnerability was a carefully constructed fortress, and inside that fortress was a man drowning in an ocean of regret. The only person who held the keys to that fortress, the only person who saw the cracks in the armor, was his wife, Jessi Colter. She wasn't just a duet partner or a supportive spouse. She was the anchor for a man who spent his entire adult life convinced that he was living on borrowed time. A man who believed with every fiber of his being that his unparalleled success was built on a foundation of unforgivable sin. The story begins long before the outlaw movement, long before the fame and the fortune. It takes us back to the bitter, unforgiving winter of 1959. Waylon Jennings was just 21 years old, a young, hungry musician from Littlefield, Texas, who had been plucked from obscurity by rock and roll pioneer Buddy Holly. Buddy saw something special in the young Texan and hired him to play electric bass on the Winter Dance Party Tour, a grueling, poorly planned trek across the frozen American Midwest. The conditions on that tour were nothing short of nightmarish. The musicians were traveling in repurposed school buses with broken heating systems. The temperatures inside the buses dropped to sub-zero levels. The musicians were exhausted, freezing, and miserable. Drummer Carl Bunch had already been hospitalized for severely frost-bitten toes. The glamour of rock and roll had completely vanished, replaced by a desperate, shivering struggle just to make it to the next town. When the tour reached Clear Lake, Iowa, Buddy Holly had finally reached his breaking point. Fed up with the freezing buses and desperate for a warm bed and a chance to do some laundry before their next gig in Moorhead, Minnesota, Buddy made a fateful decision. He chartered a small, single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza airplane to fly him and two of his band members ahead of the rest of the crew. Originally, the seats on that plane were meant for Buddy, Waylon, and guitarist Tommy Alsop. Waylon was thrilled. The prospect of escaping that freezing bus even for one night felt like a lottery win. But destiny, in its cruelest form, intervened. Another star on the tour, J.P. Richardson, known to the world as the Big Bopper, was suffering from a terrible case of the flu. He was a big man, deeply uncomfortable in the cramped, freezing bus seats, and he approached Waylon with a desperate plea. He asked if Waylon would give up his seat on the warm airplane so he could get some rest and recover from his illness. Waylon, possessing a good heart and a generous spirit, agreed without hesitation. He handed over his ticket to a warm bed, resigning himself to another brutal night on the icy highway. When Buddy Holly found out that Waylon had given up his seat, the two friends engaged in some light-hearted, sarcastic banter in the dressing room of the surf ballroom. It was the kind of ribbing that musicians do to pass the time, completely devoid of malice. Buddy looked at Waylon, a smirk on his face, and said, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." Waylon, not missing a beat, fired back with a grin, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Those 8 words. "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." It was a throwaway joke. A meaningless retort between two exhausted friends trying to find a momentary spark of humor in a miserable situation. But a few hours later, in the dead of the Iowa night, that Beechcraft Bonanza plunged into a snow-covered cornfield, killing Buddy Holly, J.P. Richardson, Richie Valens, and the young pilot Roger Peterson. When the news of the crash reached Waylon Jennings, the world as he knew it shattered. He wasn't just devastated by the loss of his mentor and his friends. He was entirely consumed by an agonizing, terrifying realization. His last words to his best friend had been a wish for his death. In the mind of a traumatized 21-year-old, he hadn't just predicted the tragedy, he had somehow caused it. He had cursed the flight. This wasn't merely sadness or grief. This was the birth of a profound, malignant survivor's guilt that would wrap itself around his soul and refuse to let go for the next 40 years. This is where the narrative of the Outlaw King takes a massive, unexpected turn. For decades, music historians and fans have analyzed Waylon's rebellious streak in the 1970s as a purely artistic crusade. He famously fought the Nashville executives for the right to use his own band in the studio, the right to choose his own songs, and the right to produce his own records. It was heralded as a triumph of artistic integrity. But Jessi Colter knew the deeper, darker truth. Behind closed doors, she saw that Waylon's defiance wasn't just about creative control. It was the manifestation of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose because he subconsciously felt he didn't even deserve to be alive. When you believe that your life is a mistake, when you carry the heavy, suffocating weight of a dead friend's legacy on your shoulders, you stop playing by the rules of polite society. You stop caring about the consequences. Waylon's outlaw persona was, in many ways, an elaborate mechanism of self-punishment and extreme risk-taking. He pushed the boundaries of his career, his health, and his relationships because he was constantly daring the universe to finish the job it started in that Iowa cornfield. This deep-seated trauma fueled his descent into a staggering, near-fatal drug addiction. During the peak of his success in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Waylon was consuming up to $1,500 worth of cocaine every single day. To the public, it looked like the ultimate rock star excess. The wild parties, the missed shows, the unpredictable behavior, it all fit perfectly into the outlaw mythology that the record labels were so eager to market. But Jessi, sitting in the quiet corners of their home, watching the man she loved deteriorate, knew exactly what the cocaine was for. It was an anesthetic. It was a way to quiet the relentless, deafening echoes of that dressing room in Clear Lake. Whenever the silence grew too loud, the ghost of Buddy Holly would return, and Waylon would medicate himself to the brink of death just to force the memories back into the dark. For years, Jessi absorbed this pain. She became the ultimate gatekeeper, fiercely protecting her husband from a media that would have gladly exploited his psychological torment for a sensational headline. She navigated the nightmare with incredible grace. She understood that if you expose a man's deepest, most vulnerable wound to the world, you might just kill him. So she kept the secret. She smiled for the cameras, she sang her beautiful duets with him, and she quietly saved his life behind the scenes, over and over again. Years after Waylon's passing, Jessi found herself confronting the physical remnants of this lifelong burden. In a quiet, unassuming house in Tucson, Arizona, away from the glittering lights of Nashville and the deafening roar of the crowds, there was an unmarked box. This box wasn't filled with platinum records or sparkling awards. It was a repository of the raw, unfiltered human experience. Inside were the fragments of a man trying desperately to reconcile his existence. Scribed notes, old itineraries, private reflections, the emotional artifacts of a survivor. Going through these items, Jessi realized that the story of Waylon Jennings had never truly been told. The world had bought into the caricature of the rough-and-tumble cowboy, completely missing the profound, tragic poetry of his actual life. Consider the sheer willpower it took for Waylon to step onto a stage night after night. He was essentially a walking ghost ship. Think about his reluctance to speak about Buddy Holly in interviews for decades. Whenever a journalist would inevitably bring up the winter dance party, Waylon's eyes would visibly darken. He would give short, clipped answers, desperate to change the subject. The press assumed he was just tired of the question, or perhaps being difficult and prickly in true outlaw fashion. But the reality was a man struggling to breathe under the weight of a panic attack, terrified that if he opened that door even a crack, the floodwaters of his guilt would completely wash him away. Even in his music, the secret was hiding in plain sight. Listen closely to the underlying sorrow in his voice on tracks like Are You Sure Hank Done It This Way, or his mournful rendition of Dreaming My Dreams With You. There is a grit and a devastating sorrow in his vocal delivery that cannot be faked or taught in a vocal booth. It is the authentic, resonant sound of a man who is intimately acquainted with the angel of death. His music resonated so deeply with millions of people because they could hear the authenticity of his suffering, even if they didn't know the exact source of the pain. He was singing for his own salvation, offering up his art as a frantic, lifelong penance for surviving. Jessi Colter's decision to eventually peel back the curtain on this deeply personal tragedy fundamentally changes everything we know about country music history. It transforms Waylon Jennings from a one-dimensional rebel into a complex, beautifully flawed, and deeply empathetic human being. It shows us that true toughness isn't about wearing black leather or fighting authority. True toughness is waking up every single day, haunted by an unbearable past, and finding a way to make music anyway. It is about carrying a curse and somehow turning it into a blessing for the rest of the world to enjoy. Waylon eventually found his way out of the darkness. He got clean. He found peace, largely due to the unwavering, fiercely protective love of the woman who held his secret safe until he was strong enough to bear it, and eventually, until the world was mature enough to understand it. Jessi Colter didn't just love the outlaw, she saved the man. But as we look back at the golden age of country music, it becomes clear that the outlaws and the legends were often wearing masks to hide unimaginable personal horrors. Waylon's curse in the snow of Iowa is a chilling reminder of the heavy toll of fame. But Waylon wasn't the only country music titan who was harboring a devastating, life-altering secret behind a trademark smile. In fact, just a few years later, another Nashville icon found himself caught in a web of mystery and tragedy that would forever alter the course of his career. A story of a missing person, a strange confession, and a midnight ride that nobody can explain. What really happened on that dark stretch of highway, and why did the music industry swear everyone to absolute silence?